Renault Sport has established quite a reputation for cracking sporty hatches. With a perky engine, beefed up suspension and a whole heap of attitude, this hot Twingo 133 shows that the French brand hasn't forgotten its younger customers. If you've a memory of one of the original 80s or 90s hot hatches, then the chances are that it'll be a happy one. These cars were magic, light, nimble and quick. Sure, they were noisy, bumpy and crude too, but on the right day, on the right road, you didn't care. Here were glorified go-karts that didn't need much power to please. They satisfied in so many other ways. Today's GTIs are safer, smarter and more refined, but sometimes when driving them, it's hard for hardcore enthusiasts not to feel that maybe something's been lost along the way. Something perhaps returned to us by this car, the Renault Sport Twingo 133. Now this is the least powerful and most affordable route into Renault Sport motoring that then leads forward into the critically acclaimed Clio and Megane Renault Sport models, cars that overcome unpromising ingredients to deliver a truly red-blooded driving experience. But then doing that with 200 brake horsepower or more under the bonnet is a lot easier than doing it with 131 brake horsepower delivered from underpinnings dating back to the late 90s. If Renault's Dieppe division can make this car work and return us to the halcyon days of the hot hatch, then you'd have to believe it to be capable of just about anything. Now this is anything but your average warmed over shopping trolley, something you realise as soon as a twist of the ignition key rewards you with a decidedly rude exhaust note. It's a promise that this car makes good on as soon as you bring on your favourite B-road. In the unlikely event that you had a go-kart track in your back garden, then I reckon one of these would be just about perfect. So yes, it harks back to those late great hot hatches of the 80s and 90s, Renault's own 5 GT Turbo for example. And yes, just like those cars, in this cut version at least, you feel every bump, ridge and pothole. There is in short a price to be paid for your pleasures, but it's one that true hot hatchers won't mind paying. You flick from lock to lock with merely a flick of the wrist, the steering response instant, the throttle response quick, the gear change sweet. True 133 PS or 131 brake horsepower to be exact, that the badge work promises isn't a great deal, but this car does weigh just 1,120 kilograms, so you don't actually need that much grunt to get this little skateboard going quite indecently fast. Now, I've shaved 10 kilograms from that figure by opting for this Cup variant, which also rides 4mm lower, has revised damper settings and stiffer springs front and rear. None of which of course does anything for this Twingo's outright performance. Rest to 60 takes 8.7 seconds on the way to 125 miles an hour, but it does make getting there a heck of a lot more fun. Body roll? What's that? You just line up a corner, select your blade of grass and aim for the apex. It's brilliant, which is all the more amazing when you consider the unpromising ingredients the Renault Sport engineers had in creating this car. The chassis, for example, it dates back to a Mark II Clio from the late 90s. And the engine, it's a 1.6 litre petrol unit more commonly found under the bonnet of a bog standard Megane family hatchback. Undaunted, they set to work to create the perfect affordable performance package. The engine got a revised inlet manifold and a bespoke throttle unit, while that chassis, well, that got a thorough seeing to, with wider tracks, lower ride height and thicker anti-roll bars. The result is a car well worthy of its famous badge. It's said that little dogs are more likely to bite, and this Twingo isn't shy of baring its teeth. Hearing that Renault had fitted a deep front spoiler, huge alloy wheels, side skirts and an in-your-face rear wing to this car before I set eyes on it, I feared that it would be nothing less than a painful example of max power excess. In actual fact, it looks punchy and purposeful, the extrovert add-ons balanced by careful touches like the dark grey detailing and the chromed exhaust pipe, while the 17-inch alloy wheels on this cut version look just brilliant. The theme continues inside. A pricier Mini Cooper or a Fiat 500 Abarth would feel more upmarket, but this Twingo eschews all that in its mission to distill its offering down to the things that really matter. So you get a perforated leather steering wheel, aluminium pedals, chunky sports seats and bright blood orange seat belts, as well as a prominent rev counter with a number font that gets larger as you approach 7,000 RPM. Driver's stuff. Not that practicality has been ignored. In fact, it's pretty spacious in here and there are no fewer than 11 storage compartments dotted around the cabin. Clambering into the back past these orange seat belts rewards you with a perch that will be quite adequate for a couple of fully sized adults as long as the journey isn't too long. They'll certainly be a lot more comfortable back here than they would be in a Fiat 500 or a Mini. Now, in the standard Twingo Renault Sport, these individual rear seats are individual. They slide and they fold separately. But in this Cup model, that's been dumped in favour of a single fixed piece rear bench. Boot space is 230 litres with all the seats in place, which you can extend to 959 litres by flattening the rear bench. List pricing suggests that you'll be paying around £13,000 for your Twingo Renault Sport 133. Now, there's a £750 saving to be made if you go for the Cup version that I've got here, but you'll have to do without air conditioning, those individually folding and sliding rear seats, rain sensing wipers, automatic headlamps and tinted rear windows, all of which is rather nice to have. So perhaps a better approach for better heeled buyers who like the Cup model's track-tuned responses would be perhaps to go for the standard Twingo Renault Sport 133, then pay a £650 premium for the Cup chassis option. Now, in terms of rivals, you're looking at saving yourself with this car around £2,000 over a smaller and only slightly quicker Fiat 500 Abarth. And the other alternative, say a Mini Cooper, is also smaller and certainly slower, and that's up around the £15,000 mark, just like the Fiat. Under the bonnet, you'll find the same 131 brake horsepower 1.6 litre petrol unit, whether you go for the standard version or the Cup model. Now, before you choose between the two, I'd suggest that a test drive in both variants is vital. For everyday use, you might struggle to live with the really firm option, tempting though it is. Either way, there's the no-cost option of Renault Sport checkered flag stickering, which personally I'd rather do without. Safety-wise, you get twin front and side airbags, anti-lock brakes with electronic brake force distribution, though sadly not ESP stability control. This car being both small and light, potential Twingo buyers should be able to run one with both their green consciences and their bank balances relatively intact. The combined fuel consumption figure of 42 miles to the gallon is one of the lowest for any petrol-powered shopping rocket hot hatch, and the 160 grams per kilometre of CO2 return is also relatively tax efficient. This model falls under Renault's Eco 2 initiative, which aims to manufacture and recycle vehicles in an environmentally friendly way. Insurance is Group 8. Power, people think, is what brings driving satisfaction. But people are wrong, and this car proves it. On a tight, twisting road, it serves up more smiles per mile than any of its more sophisticated shopping rocket rivals. Of course, you've got to pay for your pleasures. It's bumpy, can be noisy, and it's certainly anything but subtle. But then there's a time and a place for being low-key, and it's not behind the wheel of this car. This Twingo reminds us exactly why the hot hatch genre took off in the first place. It was all about providing practical performance that almost anyone could afford, something that most brands have forgotten. Renault hasn't. Thank goodness for that.